Shalom and welcome to Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle here on lamnetwork.tv, where we interview people who who have been walking the life of Torah for a while now to give you hope that you're not alone in your understanding that God still cares about his commandments and still considers them the standard of a holy life and wants us to live by them through the lens of the finished work of Yeshua the Messiah. My name is Darryl Weinberg of A Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and I am honored to be your host. Well, tonight I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing someone who has become a friend of mine over the last little while. We met through email, and until this evening, that's the only way that we have communicated, but we have developed a relationship nonetheless. And this lady has been involved in journalism for many, many years. Since 1974, has been investigating the Christian right and its association with cults in the New Age and whatnot. And she's kind of a watchdog for the Christian right. And the articles that I've read about her exposure of certain connections of people we might think are kosher are quite fascinating. The lady certainly has chops. She knows what she's talking about, and I have the pleasure of having her tell her story. I'd like to introduce everybody to my friend, Kelly Nelson. Welcome, Kelly.
Oh, hi.
It is great to have you on. It's great to finally meet you, sort of in person. It's two-dimensional, not three, but nonetheless, we have an opportunity to speak. How have you been?
I've been great. And how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Praising God every day.
Yes.
So you live in Tennessee, as we've been discussing.
Yeah.
And how did you get into journalism?
Oh, golly, that goes way back. I lived in the near north side of Chicago. It's the nightlife area, but I worked downtown, so I lived in an apartment with another gal, and we were both working. But I noticed that things went on in the neighborhood that we kind of needed to know about. So I'd write little weekly updates, and I'd take them to all the little bars and restaurants, and they'd tack them on the door. And this is kind of how this started. And then I got asked by various organizations, oh, would you write a little column here, a little column there? And it just kind of has continued throughout my life. Sometimes I've left it off because I'm busy with other things. But it's not something, I'm an English grammar major, but I never really intended to go into journalism. Nevertheless, it seems to be a gift that I have. And so that's where I've ended up. And it's something I enjoy. I like research. So there you have it.
Okay. And so you have a number of different publications that you work with. I got to know you through News with Views, which is a Christian publication, has some wonderful articles. It has Coach Dave on it and some tremendous writers. Who else are you affiliated with?
Well, there's a place in, I can't think of the name, but it's Dan Newman. He has a radio show. He's in Louisiana. He prints my articles. Another gentleman in Australia, Alistair, prints my articles. And then Dr. Rich is in Florida, and he prints them as well. So they kind of get spread around the country.
No, okay.
But they get all over the place. I mean, I have friends in Israel that read them. So that's a good thing.
Well, once you're online, it's amazing where things end up going. Huh?
It is. It really is. Sometimes places you don't want it to go. But
well, and this is the thing, right?
Yeah.
So you grew up in it was a Christian home, correct?
Yes.
Well, it was Lutheran. So tell us about the journey to come to understand your Hebraic roots and the love for Israel that you developed, because this is what really, I think, attracted me to you, and for me to reach out to you to begin with was you're standing in the gap really, whereas a lot of I think Christian people either ignore it or really come against it.
Oh, that's kind of a long story, but I loved my Lutheran church. I loved the liturgy,
Mhm.
but I knew instinctively that their doctrine was not doctrine that I had read in my Bible. Now you have to understand that the neighborhood I was raised in, it was mostly Jewish. All my friends were Jewish, other than a few. When I had my first child, my friends' moms would come and help me because my daughter was so colicky. So I had these little Jewish mamas coming over and cooking for me and taking care of the baby so I could take a nap. So my natural instinct was, I love these people, you know?
Mm.
And I had a lot of Italian friends as well. And I found that they're very similar. They really love family, food, and fun. That's
Mhm.
that's the way it is. So I never really got away from knowing that I always felt the Jewish people were our brethren, so to speak. And,
Mhm.
and actually they are. So through this journey, I went to work for a man in the 90s by the name of Henry Weinberg. And Henry was a radio host, and he was a born again Christian.
Mhm.
And he and I would talk off air about our beliefs. And I told him, I said, look, I've been studying for 10 years anti-Semitism in the church. And he said, you have got to meet Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum of Ariel
Mm.
Ministries. Well, that was now, 30 some years ago. And I've been with Arnie Fruchtenbaum, and he teaches. Boy, does he teach. He's really great, wonderful. He came to the knowledge of Yeshua as his savior at the age of 13 when he got off the boat from Siberia, saw
Mhm.
the only Jewish star in the country, thought he was going into a Jewish place, and it was the only Jewish place that brought Jewish folks to Messiah, that taught them about Messiah. And he walked out at 13 and he knew. And then he had a wonderful mentor who led him through his life to get where he was, even though after high school, his father made him leave home.
Mhm.
So it was all done on his own, and the Lord helped him. I mean, it's just amazing what the man went through. So when I told Henry that, I'd gone through all of this, and he said, this is who you need to study under. So I
Mm.
did. And we have been supporting and studying under Arnie for all these years. Well, then I went to work for another radio host as his executive producer, and he was national. He had like 300 affiliates, so we really had a lot of coverage. And I told him, he was friends with Henry, and I said, Roger, here's what I've been doing for 10 years. Before all these people leave us, I want to do a series on the Holocaust. Once a week, 2 hours. How about a Wednesday evening? And I'll get the guests and set them up, and I'll have them all send the books to you so you'll know what we're talking about. We did that. It went on for 21 weeks.
Mm. Wow.
And Roger's passed away now, but he told me, I don't know how many times, he said that was the best thing I ever did in my life. And of course, Henry was listening to a lot of those programs because they were so wonderful. We had one man who was a professor from one of the California universities, and I'm getting off topic, but this is so interesting to me. He was a young man, a young boy, and they were in a railway station, and his mother said, when the guard isn't looking, run. And he did. Well, for several years, he managed to escape, and finally he ended up in one of the camps. And wouldn't you know, a veteran who had liberated that camp called up on the show and told him, I was there with so-and-so troops and I liberated that camp. And you could hear in the veteran's voice, he was about to crack. He was about to break up. But this is kind of where my life has been. And so this is where a lot of my writing leads me as well, because there's a new rise of anti-Semitism. And I have Jewish friends all over the United States. And Janet in California keeps me pretty posted on what's going on with all this anti-Semitic stuff. And she sends me particular schools that we need to write to and so forth. So we kind of get together and do that because there's a lot of Jews and Christians who really get along quite well. In fact, we have a prayer chain that goes to the UK, to Australia, to Israel, and all over America. And we have two Jewish gals who are not believers in Yeshua, who are on our prayer chain. And both of them said, what does it matter? We all pray to the same God, which is interesting to me. I wish I could just get them over the edge, you know what I'm saying? But
yeah, well,
it takes time.
It's partially correct, but not entirely. But wow, so you've really had a heart for this for a long time now, and I think Arnold is considered the smartest guy ever to graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary.
Really?
Yeah, and the second smartest apparently was a guy who preceded him, Charles Weinberg,
That's interesting.
Who was one of John MacArthur's professors when he went to Dallas. Yeah. So it's very interesting. I met Arnold, I think it was back in 2003. He was speaking at a synagogue in Toronto. So I went to see him.
He's a little guy, isn't he?
Yep, he certainly is, but more than makes up for it with his contributions to the faith. And Arrow Ministries has been incredibly impactful for many people such as yourself. So you and Larry have been married for almost 40 years now, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so talk about this journey. Like, did the two of you come together with this heart for the Jewish people?
When I met him,
because it was at church you met him, right?
When I met him, we were still going to the Lutheran church, and we absolutely loved the minister who married us. And the sermon he gave at our wedding was about Ruth. It was a story of Ruth, which was, that kind of just set us off in the right direction, didn't it? But we loved Jack, and we will always love Jack. And Jack was an excellent teacher. But I never really agreed with the replacement theology of the Catholic and the Reformed churches. And when we came here initially, we went to a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod, which is much more conservative than any of the rest of them. And I ended up having young couples come up to me and say, well, how are we going to survive this? What are we going to do? And I would have to flip through the Bible and say, look, read this whole chapter in context. And I usually went to Luke, where it said, watch, therefore, that you are escape all these things. Do you remember that passage? I can't give you the exact quote.
Mm-hmm.
But so many people were afraid. They were fearful, and that's not what the Lord wanted us to be. Even if we do go through terrible times, we should not be afraid. And I think too many people today are afraid with things that are going on throughout the world, but especially in America. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why my email on the other for the journalist stuff is Proverbs 133, because the Lord says in Proverbs 133, if you belong to me, you should have no fear. And you can go
Right.
into a big study about that, because
Well, perfect love casts out fear, we're told.
well, this is it. But I have people call me and they can't sleep. They're so disturbed about what's happening.
Well, I think one of the problems that we have in North America is that it's just been too comfortable for too long. And we've never had the experience of an Arnold Fruchtenbaum who had to escape. I mean, I don't remember, I heard his story many, many years ago, but basically he had to foot it out of, of Russia. And it was like one country after another.
Yeah.
And because of our Judeo-Christian heritage here in Canada and the US, we have had it comfortable for far too long,
Yeah.
and we've never really experienced the persecution that basically the rest of human history has had to go through. We have conveniences now that even 100 years ago were unfathomable. And one of the things that the Lord really showed me last year was, why are we in this mess? And He told me back in August of 2019 that judgment had begun in His house. I was really getting on Him one day because things were winding up in Peterborough where we were. We knew we were going to be moved down here to the Niagara area. But still, I mean, we were trying to run ministry up there, and everybody would just flake out. And
Yeah.
one day I said, why do you keep sending me these people? Where are my builders? And he just responded to me. I remember I was in the kitchen, and he said, all he said to me was 1 Peter 4:17. And I went, uh-oh, that's not good, because the judgment has begun. Like, we always look at that as something in the future tense. And so sure enough, we get moved down here. COVID hits 3 months later, and the whole world it gets turned upside down.
It
And
is.
what the Lord showed me last year is I was reading through Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah 22:21, it says, I spoke to you in your prosperity, but you did not listen.
That's right.
And that jumped out at me and said, and that I understood. This is why we're in this mess, is that I've been preaching this for who knows how long, but there it was in the word that
Yeah.
God spoke to Israel in their prosperity. God spoke to the church in their prosperity. We've gone like this, la, 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 la. We want to keep the program going. We want to keep the good times rolling. And so God said, we're ending the prosperity. And now North America was going to start dealing with what the entire rest of the world, like the church in China and the church in Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Iran have been dealing with, in North Korea for, who knows how long. So, here we are. And the reason why people are getting all freaked out is because no one's got any spiritual muscles.
Yeah.
We somehow, and we bought into this unique American thing, which is called the prosperity gospel. Now, listen, I'm all about prosperity. I think the gospel is about prosperity, but not in the way it's been defined as God's going to make me rich and God's going to make me comfortable. That's not what it's talking about. And so this thing that's been exported to the blight of the rest of the world, all over the place, like especially in places like Africa and whatnot. And so God's just yanked the rug out from underneath all of that. And now He says, now you're going to learn what I meant when I said in John 16:33 that I tell you these things for you will have tribulation in the world, but fear not, I have overcome the world. So I think what the Christian church needs to understand is it's got to drop down and it's got to start giving us 20. It's got to start doing some push-ups.
Well, today's church is more of a social gathering for many of them. And the rest of it, we have been to so many churches, and so many of them are still preaching milk and pablum. And I'm like, when are you guys going to ever get to the meat? Because you could spend 10 years just in Genesis alone. And they're never getting down into the really good stuff that can really build your faith.
Yeah.
It's depressing. It
Well,
really is.
and God is trying to wake up the remnant right now. And this, but it's not even the church. The church it's a done deal. Like, I mean, Matthew 24 says that many are going to fall away. So the church isn't what God is concerned about. What he's concerned about is the remnant. And he's trying to put the remnant through boot camp. And I did martial arts for many, many years.
Good.
And, you know, even before you got to throw your first real punch in the ring, you had to do months of physical training and rewire your body so that you knew how to throw a proper punch. And so what the church, I think, is now being put through is that it's learning how to start getting in shape, and it's learning its spiritual authority, and it's learning what it means to do warfare. And this is something that I try talking about, and you should see the blank look I get from most pastors.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
That's a shame.
Or you even talk to like Pentecostal pastors, and they're all about spiritual warfare. You know, we take our authority and everything else, but they don't really understand how it works.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's going on right now is that there's a toughening up that's going on. We're being put through boot camp. And how long this lasts before revival breaks out will, I think, be dependent upon how long it takes the remnant to wake up and start opening its eyes and start walking in obedience. That is what God's requirement is for us, because you can't, I did a message on this a couple of weeks ago, where you can't walk in, you have power. Power is a gift, but the dark side has power too. What we can't exercise is that authority, the exousia, unless we're walking in obedience. And so what God did is, the way that I look at it is, God shut down the program-oriented church, where it's all about the machine. It's all about plugging people into the system. And it's got to go back to the relationships, and it's got to go back to, we've got to start depending on one another, because if we can't rely on one another, the governments have now officially turned against this. It's been going on for years, and you would certainly know a lot more about that than I would.
Yes. Long time.
But now we've got to start developing that community, those relationships. It's not about the programs. It's not about you know, how many butts we have in seats, and it's not about the offering, and it's not about whether we've got this program running. It's about how, for me, I think the key verse in the New Covenant is Titus 3:14, is that our people must learn to do good deeds to meet urgent needs, so that we may not become unfruitful. And so what God is doing is he's driving us to our knees so that we may start becoming fruitful again. And part of that is coming back to our Hebraic roots. And part of that is coming back to understanding how God chose the nation of Israel in order to be his witness in the earth. He says that you are a chosen vessel. Paul is a chosen vessel to bring the understanding of Torah to the world so that we can be prosperous.
Yeah.
And we got to come back to that.
Well, it's unfortunate that a lot of churches are not preaching what they should be preaching. And a lot of churches are fearful of preaching what they should be preaching.
Well, it drives people away.
Yes. Well, not only that, but, you know, the government watches very closely. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have spies in a lot of the big churches, especially.
There is something called, I think it's called the pastoral response team, where you have pastors who have been trained by the government that when the word goes out that the pastors need to lead their people into the FEMA camps. for safety.
Oh, geez.
Steve Quayle has talked about that extensively, and Dave Hodges as well.
Yeah, well, FEMA is not to be trusted. That's for sure.
Or any other government institution.
No, there's the whole government is infiltrated, and it has. I actually looked at how many people in Congress are really, truly on our side, on the side of the people. And when I got it all down, it was like there's maybe 3 or 4. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
The rest are bought and owned.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a good thing to say about America's government.
Well, but it's because we've been asleep at the wheel, and I love reading Coach Dave's Daubenmayer's his articles, because he's been ranting about this for who knows how many years, and he's trying to be a watchman. He's trying to warn the people, and the reason why we are in the mess that we're in is because the church has been asleep at the wheel. We have not been the bulwark against the onslaught of the enemy. We have allowed him to creep in because we've been too comfortable. We've been focused on
somebody else will do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not only that, is because it doesn't affect me directly. See, because abortion doesn't affect me directly, I haven't been out there protesting about it. Because the removal of specific rights that have been encroaching. I mean, look at what happened after 9/11. You had the establishment of the NDAA, and you had the establishment of FEMA and Homeland Security, all these things.
All these new things.
It didn't affect the church directly. It didn't affect the Sunday service. It didn't affect the Sunday offering. So you know what? We ignored it. We weren't out there protesting. Where was the church standing on Capitol Hill when the Supreme Court passed Roe versus Wade in 1973?
Yeah.
That changed the entire landscape of the United States. This past year, I think you remember when the Lord called me to lead a time of fasting and prayer for Canada to get rid of the spirit. What the Lord told me was, you must remove the spirit of Henry Morgenthaler. And you would, of course, know who he was.
Yes.
He was the abortion doctor from Toronto who challenged the abortion laws in Canada. And since 1988, Canada has had absolutely no restrictions on abortion. We're one of 3 countries in the world. China, North Korea, and Canada can murder their babies right up until the time that they're born. And so what happened was when that all went down, there was a principality that was brought into Canada, and God says, you need to get rid of the spirit. And so he called me to lead a time of fasting and prayer for 7 days back last April. And we came against this spirit. But we should have been protesting at the time that the church should have been up in arms about the fact that this law was struck down. Yeah. So unfortunately, because the church has not been a light,
they don't even talk about it. They don't even speak about abortion. They're silent.
Yeah.
That's the problem. They're silent.
I know.
Yeah.
So, so you and Larry, you were in the Lutheran church, but they weren't teaching what they were supposed to. So, what happened after that? Where'd you go after that?
Well, I'll tell you, my husband was an elder several times, re-voted in, and the pastor loved him. But the pastor was, it was me first. I said, I can't stay here. I just can't stay here. And it was little things in Sunday school. I remember one in particular where he said, the devil is like a mean dog that's chained up in a yard, and if you don't go in that yard, you won't get bit. And I'm sitting there and I said, I'm a mouth. See, so here goes the mouth. I said, Pastor, that's not true. He goes to and fro like a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour. And then the pastor next week brings in a book, What Lutherans Believe. and he points to me. And I said, I'll stick with this right here, the Bible. Well, that was kind of, I said, this is the fourth or fifth thing. I can't do this anymore. And my husband stayed for a while to finish out his term.
Yeah.
And then he told the pastor he was leaving. And
Uh-huh.
do you know that pastor called him probably 5 or 6 times and kept wanting him to come back? Not me, but just Larry. I thought, ooh, that's really telling, isn't it? The mouthy wife is not wanted.
You come back, just don't bring the wife with.
Yeah. So he ended up having to go over there, and he spent 2 hours with him explaining why we wouldn't be back. But my husband is such a kind, nice, easy gentleman that he didn't make it difficult for him, I'm sure. But so we left, and we've toddled around to all these other churches, and we just keep kind of going, well, yeah. I'll tell you though, there's a new guy that's writing for News with Views, and his name is Roland Mackenzie. Have you read anything? He's very good. I like him very much. He gives a nice sermon every Sunday, doesn't he?
Yep. I've read a couple of his articles.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous cadre of people there. Always love. I mean, I've loved Debbie Kidd for many years. She doesn't pull any punches.
Yeah, Rob Pugh is good on Sunday too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rob, yeah.
He's the publisher for Wisconsin Christian News.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where now you also have a bakery. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you, when we moved from Ohio, I couldn't find a job here that replaced the position I had in Ohio, because I was marketing and communications and advertising manager for a Fortune 100 company. And they weren't willing to pay me anything here. So I said, well, I'm still young enough. I went back to work in a restaurant, and I was a waitress for a couple of years, and they said, how about being a manager? You're so good at this. I said, okay. So I did that for a while, and then I thought, I've got to do something else. I'm not getting any younger. And that's long hours and everything. And one of my bosses, who actually passed away too, he said to me, he said, you do such wonderful baked goods. Why don't you do your own business? And I said, that's an idea. So I left, and we have 2,100 square feet in the basement, and it opens out ground level in the back, because we're on a hill, although we look like a ranch in the front. So I've got all this huge equipment down there. I mean, 60-quart mixers, great big ovens, divider rounders, all this stuff. So when people come in, like when the inspectors change and they come to a house, they think it's going to be very minor. And I open the door from the garage and let them in, and they go, oh, yeah, it's really a commercial bakery, because we used to bake for all the big stores around here. Now I'm semi-retired. We only do one little store downtown, and that's it. And we don't do all the yeast breads and everything anymore. However, that was a really good business for 30 years. And it gave us a lot of tax breaks. And now everything is just too costly. The prices have risen so much. But we were going back to the church. We were talking about the church. Where was the church during COVID? There was only a couple of them that rebelled. And we were born in rebellion, this country. We were born in rebellion. Where were we? They all closed, and they said, well, you can watch us on the web. I thought, oh boy.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. I had a couple of sermons where I don't think the other pastors would be too happy to hear about.
Yeah, but see, I would like that because
Mhm.
that's where we should be, and we weren't. That, and here's the other thing. You know how this just recently happened? There was a swimming meet, and there was a guy who claimed he was a girl, and he was allowed to compete. And you got
Yeah.
all these girls, and of course he won, right? And I said, you know, if all of those girls had gotten together and said, he's a man, he's got an
We're
X
not
and a
doing
Y
this.
chromosome, and we've got two X's, we are not competing with him.
Yeah.
That would have put a stop to it. But they didn't. They went
No.
ahead and competed. Why? Because they were afraid of losing their scholarships.
Yeah. To
So,
get a degree that will get you nothing in the end anyway. No, it's and this is something that's been really on my heart more and more, is that unfortunately we're at the point now where the only thing that's going to stop this is violent resistance. And I don't know exactly what all that looks like, and I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. How do you line that up with the scriptures which talk about passive resistance, the Martin Luther King model, and stuff like that? But they're not going to stop. I mean, you look at what happened with the trucker convoy last year,
yeah,
and there has never been a protest like that in all of history. And
that was
Trudeau
magnificent.
didn't budge. He eventually walked a couple of things back, but we're still under the same kind of ridiculous tyranny that we
He's,
were under.
yeah.
And he went after the people who were organizing. We've got our own J6ers that are still suffering the consequences.
Yeah.
So it's going to take us rising up, and we are going to have to be trusting the Lord, and we're going to have to be like Mordecai. We're going to have to be like Daniel. We're going to have to be like Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, and say that our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to your God. And we need the church to rise up.
We
Now,
haven't seen passive resistance.
no,
We
we haven't seen any resistance.
I mean, Sophie Scholl, the White Rose, all of them were guillotined. They all died. But for 8 months, they passed out all of this literature, and everything was passive. It was not violent.
Yeah.
You could basically say the same thing about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, although he was involved in trying to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah.
But he ended up hanged.
A month before the concentration camp was liberated.
It was only a matter of days, I think, before I forget the name of it, but yeah, it was just a terrible thing. What a loss. And that was a Lutheran pastor,
Yeah.
But boy, did he not love and his brother and his brother-in-law died the same day with him because they were involved. And wasn't his one brother-in-law a Jewish fellow? I believe he was.
Yeah, that I don't know.
I can't remember, but I know they loved the Jewish people, and that's why they resisted. So, but we're marking. There's a new film that's out with Vera Sharav. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Do you know her?
No.
She's a Holocaust survivor, and she said, we are marching lockstep with the same way that it went in Nazi Germany. We are absolutely following the same road. And I just finished an article that really does a comparison of that and and shows how we're walking down the same road. And what the next part of this article is going to look at what they possibly could do next and see if the people don't wake up. They're still in their recliners. They're, and I bet you out of the 21 homes on my street, there's probably only 5 who open their Bibles every week or every day. 5. That's how weak we are. You see?
Oh, I know. Now, you going back to your Chicago days, you had a very interesting classmate.
Yeah, you're behind me. Yes, and she was a Goldwater girl with me too.
So talk a little bit about that.
Well, in 1964, Barry Goldwater ran for president against LBJ, and of course he lost. That was really the beginning of the change from old right constitutional conservatives to basically these neocon Trotskyites, which are slow Marxists. That's why you see very little difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. But at the time, Hillary Rodham, who became Hillary Clinton, was involved as well. And she was just a year behind me. So she graduated in 65. And we ran into each other quite a few times in being gathered together and knowing where to go and what to do and so forth. And she was so bossy. Everybody just wanted to get away from her. In fact, several of the fellows in my class said they'd thought about asking her out, but she had such a cold personality that they just really kind of stayed away. But she was a very nice looking girl, and she had straight A's. She was a smart cookie. And that school was one of the top schools in America at the time. There were over 6,000 people in our college or in our high school before they split after the year I graduated, and a new Maine South opened up, and then she transferred to Maine South. But we had some great people in there. Harrison Ford graduated in 60. Carrie Snodgrass graduated in my class. And there's just been a bunch of other ones throughout history at that school. It's really a great school. We even had an underground rifle range. And the guys would come to school with their trucks and their rifles and be on the racks behind it. Nobody stole them. Nobody got killed. And that was the way it was. It was much better than it is today. You even make a picture of a gun today, you're in trouble.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's
so those were interesting times in that high school. And most of those kids were pretty conservative too. And because we had gym class every day, nobody was chubby. Not a single one. They were all skinny. You know, that was John F. Kennedy that liked that. I think that should come back today. You know, our kids are out of shape. All they do is run their thumbs, you know?
Well, and, you know, with the food that they're eating, that's all processed and full of GMOs and stuff like that. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. That we've got an assault. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Agenda and Agenda 2.
Yeah, I have.
But he does an amazing job. I can't remember the name of the director for that, but he traces this entire assault that we've got going from all these different, whether it be terrorism or you know, climate craziness and all this other stuff, and it all goes back to the same people. It's all this, you know, these people in Davos and Other parts of Switzerland really seems to be the nest for all of this stuff. And it's a planned assault, and the Bible warns us that this was going to happen.
Sure.
And yet, I mean, you look at what happened in Israel over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Netanyahu, who is as corrupt as they come, and yet they can't seem to get anybody else in as prime minister over there for any length of time. I had heard actually Lapid, who was the previous prime minister under the coalition that they had, his wife was reputed to have been a believer.
Ooh.
His sister-in-law is without a doubt a believer. As a matter of fact, Tovia Singer says that unquestionably. But there was someone from One for Israel Ministries who was speaking in the States somewhere. He was at a church, and he said that Lapid's wife was actually a believer. So of course this had, the rabbinic community up in arms.
Yeah.
They've denied it, of course. But if you look at where we're at in prophecy right now, and the fact that there's this attempt to commit genocide against the Jewish people, and it's happening from their own leaders. This is the part that just astounds me. When you look at the establishment of the state of Israel, and the fact that it's basically the Masons that have run the show since the get-go.
There you go. Yeah.
You look at the Israeli Supreme Court.
Masons. That's really the key.
Yeah. And they're no friend of they are the synagogue of Satan. So even though they may be Jewish, and look who's on the World Economic Forum. You've got Harari, you've got Soros, you've got Kissinger, you've got Fink, all these guys. And so this is where a lot of anti-Semitism is coming from, of course, that you've got far too many representatives of the 12 tribes that are in these Luciferian organizations. But that doesn't represent, the average Jewish person that just wants to be left alone. That's and right. to live their lives according to the way everybody else wants to.
But see, it's just like Satan to choose Jewish people to do the dirty work, because in that way he just creates more hatred for God's people.
So what's the solution? As a journalist, how do you approach this?
I really don't know. I think the churches are really responsible here again, because they should be doing some preaching against this. Look at these universities and colleges where the heads of these places are not saying a word. In fact, they're allowing it, and actually sometimes they're even promoting it. It's outrageous. And then MIT, I just read, who was it that exposed this? I can't recall who it was right now, but MIT actually has 25% of their students are from China, and they get mega bucks from China. So they've changed what used to be an absolutely fabulous school and place to graduate from is now just another woke institution.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Michael Lake, he had spoken at one time about Harvard, and the fact that Harvard, it was a Christian school.
That's right.
And
Princeton.
the graduates there where you had to be fluent in Greek and Hebrew, and you had to know German too, and to get your degree from there. And yet look where it is today. So, but again, everything in society has been targeted, and they're very intentional. And one of the things that we have to understand about the enemy is because of the belief within these occult circles that they're going to be reincarnated. Goes back to what Satan said in the garden, that you will surely not die. That they'll work on a plan for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And yet Christianity, because of this prosperity gospel, because of this hyper grace, because of all these things, we have the attention span of electric shock. It's the microwave generation. And so we're battling against an enemy that's much more organized. And this is really what my book is all about, is the fact that we're so fractured. We've got thousands of denominations, and nobody's agreeing with each other. And we separate over the most ridiculous things. I approached a Christian bookstore here in the Niagara area about carrying my book, and he's the only one in the region.
Yeah.
And I called him up last week, and he said to me that, well, he doesn't really have a lot of, he's gone through some of the book, he's kind of skimmed through it and read some things. And he says, well, we don't really have a lot of Messianic stuff, so we're not going to carry it. And so what he was telling me is that he didn't agree with my premises of the book, that Christianity is in disobedience because it's not obeying the commands of God. And so therefore, because he disagrees with it, he's not going to carry it. So he's practicing censorship, even though everything that I've said in the book, I backed up with scripture. Now, you can choose to disagree with it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the fact that a Christian bookstore won't carry a Christian book because it has a view that he does have Eugene Peterson's The Message Bible, which in the Lord's Prayer says, as above, so below. It's a occultic saying. That's okay.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing in our local store. There, we only have one left. We used to have dozens of them, and now they're all gone. But this one, and when this one sells the building, it will be gone too. But I have seen where they carry things that I wouldn't bring into my home.
They're abominations.
It's well, you know who these preachers are that are false. And they carry all of those, and people are drawn to that easy stuff rather than, nobody wants to study to show themselves approved anymore, do they? They just want soft Christianity. That's what they want. I have a friend, we were friends for 50 years. We lived next door to each other, and she loved, what's that guy in Texas that, oh, I can't even think of his name, but if I could think of it, you'd say, yeah.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah, and it's and I don't know where you stand on this, but I don't agree with women as preachers. That's not the way the Lord set this up. And the majority of these women, in fact, I haven't found one yet that is a really good female preacher. The majority of them are nuts. They're really goofy. And and this is what my friend of 50 years, she's just a sweet lady, but she's drawn to this stuff. And this stuff is just garbage.
Yeah.
And I would say to her, oh, no, I can't read that. She, oh, why? I like her. Oh, what do you do?
Yeah, there's just if there's not an openness, you can't do anything about it. So we got a couple minutes left. What would you like to convey to the audience? You've been in journalism for 50 years now. You see where things are going. You've written some just tremendous articles. And if you want to find Kelly, you can find her on News with Views. You can get their email updates every day, new articles. Where else can they find you, by the way?
Oh, gee, I can't remember the names of everything. It's Dr. Rich Swire, Swire.
Well, do you have like your own website or anything like
No,
that?
I don't. But I'll tell you what, I'm thinking about opening a Substack because you can actually ask for donations on Substack. And that would be a nice little way to bring in a little bit more money. And I've got 14 years worth of articles that still are really pertinent today. I could put an article up every day for 14 years.
Yeah.
So that could be done. But the thing that I really, really want people to do, and they're not doing it, they're not waking up. They're not noticing what's happening. they'll say little things, but then they'll go back in their house and watch a football or basketball game or whatever and drink beer on the weekends. And I'm like, I can't even get them in mass to write to their representatives.
Yeah.
They don't want to do anything. Well, what are they going to wait until we're loading them in the boxcars? Is that what's going to happen? Is it going to get that bad before they say, what happened?
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? I mean, they won't read their Bibles. They won't do anything to stop the horror that's going on.
I think as we wrap this up here, I think we just need to continue to hit our knees. We need to cry out. We need to be standing in the gap, and we need to continually proclaim the truth that Messiah is coming back, and he's not coming back as the Lamb of God this time. He's coming back as the Lamb of Judah.
Oh no!
And it's going to be messy for those who aren't with them. And I think the final thing I'd like to say is that the verse that scares me in the Bible more than any other is Matthew 7:21, which says that many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, Lord. And he says, depart from me. I never knew you.
I never knew you. Yeah.
Make sure that you are part of the remnant.
Yeah.
And make sure that you have your eyes open and you're walking in spirit and truth. Kelly, it has been, I can't believe that the hour is gone already. I know we could do this for several more, but so you hang on as we close this out. And just want to thank everybody for joining us once again for Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Same time, same station, and we'll continue to profile people who have walked this walk. Shalom, everybody, and have a great week.
Okay.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.